Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. My guest today is Congressman Rodney Davis. Mr. Davis is the congressman from the 13th Congressional District in Illinois. He represents a portion of St. Louis Metro East area, including parts of Collinsville, part of Maryville, Glen Carbon, Edwardsville, SIUE, northern parts of Alton and Godfrey. His district from Metro East goes eastward to Champaign County. This includes parts of 13 other counties. Congressman Davis was recently reelected to his second term. He defeated former Madison County Chief Judge Ann Callis by 59 to 41% in what was supposed to be a very close race. Congressman Davis is a member of the House Committee on Agriculture and the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Rodney Davis, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
Well, I'm glad to have you back. It was longer, it didn't seem that long ago, but it's been like about a year since you were here last. So
wow.
Yeah, time goes by fast.
It
especially
does.
as we get older, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So, I was just rereading something that Edward Dirksen, you remember who that is, a former Republican senator from the state of Illinois here. And he said, I want to make sure we get it right here, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. Okay. Now, this year, I can't remember the exact number, but isn't the United States budget something like 4,000 billion? Somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 billion dollars. Mm-hmm. How did we get from $1 billion? He would have said this probably somewhere in the 1950s or early 1960s. How do we get from where $1 billion was considered a lot of money to where now Congress is dealing with something on the order of 3,000 to 4,000 billion dollars?
Well, the country's obviously grown and government has grown. That was before Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. That was before spending rose throughout the 70s and even through the 80s. But I'm happy to report right now we're actually at lower spending levels in Washington, D.C. than when they accused my colleague Paul Ryan of pushing Granny off the cliff. We've actually reduced our deficit to the lowest level since World War II, since Senator Dirksen was in Washington. So I think we're on the right track, in spite of the fact that we're dealing with an administration that has yet to meet a tax dollar you and I and the people of this district have yet to earn that they don't want to spend or tax. It took a Republican Congress coming in 2010 after the election, sworn in 2011, to stop the $1 trillion borrowing that the economic stimulus package dealt to not just this generation, but to future generations.
Now, we're sitting on, I believe it's right now somewhere around $18 trillion. And of course, that's like a crazy number that Dirksen could probably never have even imagined. And within a couple more years, before January 20th of 2017, when the new president takes office, we might be as high as $20 trillion. Okay, so let's just talk nice round number, $20 trillion. That's like 20,000 billion. What are we going to do? I mean, if we were a family, we'd probably want to pay this off so we're not continuously paying interest on this money and give the folks back the money that we borrowed from. Is there any serious talk in Congress, or has there been, about repaying this $20 trillion?
Well, this $20 trillion debt in a couple of years, it's $18 trillion now, is no different than a maxed out Visa card in a family budget. But what you first have to do is change the way you spend money on a monthly basis at your house before you can begin to pay that maxed out credit card down. And that's what we're doing by reducing the deficit. We're reducing how much is being spent how much is being spent by this government on an annual basis versus what was being spent and how much was being borrowed. There used to be much more put into the credit card than what is being put in now because we've reduced that spending level. The key is, how do we get to balance again? That can happen, Lee. I remember in 1997, there were budget deficits projected for the next 10 years by the Clinton administration. And then we had a negotiated agreement, a better economy. We had balanced budgets, seemingly overnight. So what we need to do is continue to grow our economy, which will allow us to balance that budget again. And my suggestion would be, once we get to budget balance and once we get to budget surpluses, which is not out of the question, we then take that money and put it towards the national debt. That would be the best decision we can make for future generations.
Well, perhaps taking some of the budget money that we're spending on stuff now and redirecting that towards paying down this debt might be in order, rather than having to build the economy up and taking that marginal amount and putting it in. Perhaps even something like a 30 or 40-year mortgage, which would actually allow people to go like, wow, okay, a mortgage. At the end, you're at zero. You know, if we were just to even create something like that, a 30 or 40-year mortgage, then people would be like, oh yeah, well, where can we find some extra money, like folks do when they're paying their mortgage? Yeah, let's throw an extra $100 in there, reduce that principal.
The problem you have right now is you've got to reduce the spending levels to where you're not spending more than you take in on an annual basis. Otherwise, you're going to borrow to pay your mortgage, and no financial advisor would tell you to borrow money to pay off your mortgage, and that's exactly what the federal government would do. So we have to reduce our annual spending level, continue to reduce the deficit to where we can get that balanced budget, and then allow Washington to reprioritize how we spend money. And that means getting back to our constitutional appropriations process, Lee. We can't continue to do short-term crisis to short-term crisis via continuing resolution. That just adds to the disarray in our country's finances, and we then can reprioritize. And when we do, that's when we can attack the national debt. And it's something that I intend to do over my next term.
The reason I bring this up to you, Congressman, is this. I don't know if you know this or not, but the Department of the Treasury has a website, obviously, but they have this other part of the website for the Bureau of Debt. If you've been there, you'll see that they show from 1988 all the way to the present date the amount of interest that's been paid on the national debt. And I think it was in 2008 was the greatest number. It was like $452 billion was paid on debt. That's when interest rates were higher than they are now. Last year, with interest rates at almost zero, we were still paying about, I think it was $430 billion on this ever-expanding debt. Now, if interest rates, or when I should say, go back to something more normal like 4%, I could see 430 suddenly being 860 or 900 or 950 billion, which is a huge, huge bite out of the tax revenue that's being generated by the federal government. That's why I'm talking about the debt.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and we should continue to talk about the debt because it's something we do have to address. And think about this: the largest single cut we had in mandatory spending during my first term in Congress was the Farm Bill that I helped negotiate. We saved $23 billion, which is wiped away when you pay that much in interest on the national debt.
Well, let me ask you
means we've got to reprioritize our spending.
What is the budget of what was the amount of the Farm Bill, the total amount, approximately?
I don't have that, and I don't want to. There's one thing that I've learned as a member of Congress: I'm not going to throw out a number unless I have the exact number. Otherwise, it gets used against you in the campaign.
But it was above 500 billion. Wasn't it?
I'll get you the exact amount, and you can tell you can show it to your viewers. But the bottom line is, we still saved $23 billion. Doing nothing would have spent that $23 billion.
Exactly.
And these are the types of decisions that I talk about when we have to reprioritize how we spend money. And there's going to be some tough decisions. If we can't get to a balanced budget without reforming some of our systems that are in place that continue to spend and borrow money automatically here in this country. And there are going to be some tough decisions that no one's going to be happy with. But this generation of leaders has got to make those decisions and quit kicking the can down the road. Otherwise, the next generation, the generation after, are going to be the ones having to deal with problems.
Mm-hmm. Now, of this $3 to $4 trillion that the national budget is in this current fiscal year, there are those that say that maybe half of it is really charity. That it goes to food stamps, Section 8 housing, Obama phones, various forms of health care for the poor, that there's a huge amount of resources of the United States that are being collected in form of taxes and then are being turned around, and instead of being used to fund the military, which is a fundamental function of the United States government, or to fund the highways or rail, which I know you're interested in. You can't do that because you're spending huge amounts, maybe as much as $2 trillion a year on all of these other functions of supporting individuals in our society instead of them supporting themselves.
Actually, the majority of the budget is eaten up by entitlement programs. It's the Social Security and Medicare and other entitlement programs that make up a majority of that budget pie. Defense is a discretionary program, and non-defense discretionary programs are actually much less of the total pie of the budget than what you would imagine. Mm-hmm. So we're cutting in non-discretionary spending. We're continuing to reduce that, but we have to look at making sure that our programs that are in place make sure that they go further for Americans. And all programs are actually being looked at when you reprioritize how you spend money in Washington. And that's where we've been successful. Now, it's not as fast as what I would like, but you know what? We are actually moving in the right direction when this Congress, with this administration, mm-hmm. has worked to reduce spending to the lowest levels on an annual basis since World War II.
Now, I agree with you there, especially with this particular administration wanting to spend huge amounts of money that faster than I guess any other administration before it. And yes, it is Congress's responsibility to allocate monies to the administration for all this spending. Let me ask you something. I was talking to some people before, and I said some stuff that I'd heard, but I want to know for sure. It was said to me, and I have repeated it, that over the last 30 years or so, Congress writes into the bills, here's the money for spending, and then they give huge amounts of authority and discretion to the administration, whatever administration it is, in order to handle things however they think is necessary and proper in order to do this. And that this president has taken this necessary and proper to a much larger extreme than previous presidents. Is it true, first of all, that you put all of these things into bills, allowing the administration to do what they think in the way that they think it should be done?
No, that's just not the case. I mean, there is always going to be some discretionary authority for any executive branch agency, but it's limited, especially when we go through our appropriations process. What continuing resolutions, which are the spending plans that America's been operating under since virtually up until last fall when we passed the omnibus bill, continuing resolutions were how Washington spent money. Congress abdicated the power of the purse to continuing resolutions. Mm-hmm. And these continuing resolutions are put together by leaders of both parties in the House and the Senate and the President without input from somebody like me. Now, when we go through our appropriations process and we fund government on an annual basis instead of short-term crisis to short-term crisis, we then limit the executive authority of the president to go out and spend money in ways that we don't determine is the proper way to spend that money. That allows us to get to the root causes of the deficit. That allows us to get to being able to get to a point where we can pay down the national debt and make much better spending decisions, which are what the American people are demanding of us right now.
Well, how does the executive department come to the conclusion that they have money in order to take 5 million non-citizens and say, oh, well, you can stay in the United States. And in addition to that, you're now going to get all of this largesse that we were talking about 5 minutes ago, where if you happen to be in the United States, you get whatever it is, the entitlements that you were talking about. Well, how is that possible?
You've brought up a couple issues. First off, I'm going to start on the immigration front. That's one thing I've been talking about during the whole discussion over the last 2.5 years about immigration reform is how do we ensure that adding millions of people to already broken entitlement systems doesn't break them even further and even faster. But what you also talk about is the president and his administration, and you're making the assumption that the president actually thought he had money to be able to push this unconstitutional executive action forward. I don't think it works that way in the Obama White House. I think they come up with an idea and then they don't care what it costs in the long run. They don't care what it costs to America. And the fact is, no money we appropriate through the appropriations process, when we kept the Department of Homeland Security operational just a week ago, and we were able to fund that department through the entire fiscal year like every other level of government is funded in this nation. We did that. That gets us back to our constitutional appropriations process. Not a single penny in the bill we passed last week will go toward implementing the president's illegal action on immigration. Not a single penny. Immigration and immigration services are funded through fees, through the immigration system we have right now. So no money that we would have voted for to spend for the Department of Homeland Security would go toward that illegal action.
You use the word illegal. How does the chief law enforcement officer of the United States do something that's illegal?
Well, we have a disagreement on whether or not it was constitutional. And I believe it was illegal because I believe it was unconstitutional. And I'm terming it both ways, but a court in Texas agreed with me that it was an unconstitutional action. And when something is unconstitutional, that means it's not legal. We're waiting on the appellate court to actually make the final decision, make another decision on whether or not the lower court was correct in that ruling. And I hope that that appellate court agrees with the lower court so that we can have some resolution to this. And then this will go down as another idea from the Obama administration that came out with a lot of news flash and then pretty much amounted to nothing.
You do agree, though, that with however many million, I don't know what the real number is, you hear 10, 11 million people in the United States that have no legal jurisdiction to be here, and yet they're here, they're working. We as a nation have to make some determination as to what to do with those folks, don't we? I mean, I guess the first step would be to Americanize them, wouldn't it be?
Well, and that's part of the discussion. I'm somebody who's more than willing to talk about our broken immigration system in this country. I think the system we have in place encourages more illegal immigration. And remember, this problem was supposed to be solved back in 1986.
Right.
So we're talking
under the Reagan administration.
Under the Reagan administration.
Right, but they never shut the border. So once they, they legalized all these people, then more came.
Well, and that's exactly why when you look long term, you got to start in a piecemeal approach. You got to come to the conclusion that there are areas where we can agree that need to be fixed. Number one, the temporary ag worker visa program is broken. That can be fixed in a very bipartisan way. The STEM visa program is broken. That's a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Students are imported to these majors because not enough Americans are going into these fields. They're brought in, and then when they graduate from universities like SIUE or U of I, they're told to go back to their home country and compete against us. That's wrong. We can fix these things. When we make those small steps, that's some improvement that gets us to a point where we can have that discussion on whether or not there should be a path to citizenship or just a path to legal status for those illegal immigrants that are in this country right now. And frankly, I don't see the political wherewithal to do anything in this Congress on the far left or the far right or even in the middle.
Well, the loggerhead seems to be, from my perspective, being not in politics. There are those, like I was just talking about, who say that you have to shut the door so that more people don't come in. And then there's the ones that say, we're not going to shut the door, until we deal with the people who are already here. Am I reading this correctly? Is that basically the two sides?
Well, there's even more sides than that, Lee. I mean, you've got the side that, even goes further, that says, let's build the biggest fence possible and stack them 4 high and then send anybody back and fire at them on the way back. And then you have the far left who says, let's just take away border security and let's make everybody a citizen who wants to come here. That's just neither end of that polar spectrum is feasible. Mm-hmm. We have to do something about those that are here, and there's going to have to be some choices that are made. I don't think there's any political wherewithal, though, to get to that final solution because of the political rhetoric on both ends of the political spectrum.
I'd like to change over to something else that has to do with, let's see, you're on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, in which there is a subcommittee on water resources and
Yes.
environment. You sit on that subcommittee. I was noticing in this article, a Bloomberg article, that talks, now this may be just a state issue, but there's a larger point to all of this, that there is a 7,000-acre Cleveland ranch in Nevada that was established in 1873 and was bought by the Mormon Church in the year 2000, and they have water underneath their land. Mm-hmm. And the Nevada Resorts Association and the AFL-CIO, which has 120 members, and developer Howard Hughes Corporation wants that water. They want it for Las Vegas. And so now there is water wars, which you would think is a 19th century term, but in fact is going on right now. Are you guys in Congress discussing water issues as the drought continues throughout the West? And water, I mean, here we're like 15 minutes from the Mississippi River. We're always going to have something to drink here. But in other parts of the country, they're not 15 minutes or even, a half hour or an hour from a large body of water. Are we discussing how to distribute water throughout the United States?
Absolutely. The water issue, especially out west, has been a major issue for decades. You have in the Central Valley of California, where most of our produce comes from, where we have 99% of the avocados that are grown in this country and sold in our stores right here in Illinois come from the Central Valley. 99% of the pistachios, almonds, the foods that we're supposed to eat more of because they're healthier, are grown in the Central Valley. The Central Valley is in a severe drought. And frankly, much of it is caused by the fact that there's been water diverted, fresh water, for a delta smelt, a small, what we would call a sardine, but is protected under the Endangered Species Act. So there are millions of gallons that are of fresh water that's being released into the Pacific Ocean to protect the delta smelt, and that water could come down to the Central Valley and ease the water shortages that they have in the western part of the United States. I'm one of 2 non-California members who have co-sponsored a bill to relax the Endangered Species Act in this case to help out the Central Valley. So I understand the water issues. You get to here in Illinois, I mean, imagine, we would love to be able to pump our fresh water out of our sump pumps and send it out west to help out for a water shortage because we have so much fresh water. Right. And when we do that, we need to actually come up with a common sense plan to address the waters of the United States. That's why the issue that's really taken our energy that relates to the Midwest in our subcommittee is the President's proposed rule for the waters of the United States, which in my opinion would allow the EPA, if implemented, to regulate things like drainage ditches.
Yes. I'm going to make one suggestion here, and I'm just one citizen, but you might want to think about this. I call it the National Water Grid. It would be almost a WPA kind of a project in which we actually start building a national water grid so that we can transfer water around the entire United States. You would also be able to hire a lot of kids out of high school and put them to work. They'd learn how to work with welding, how to work with pipes. You'd also be manufacturing and using a lot of metals, manufacturing a lot of piping, and it would create a whole lot of real good jobs and would be a win-win for the United States. Just an idea that I thought might be a worthwhile thing for you to even propose.
Well, it's a very interesting idea. As a matter of fact, you know, I would hope that it has better luck in being created, you know, those pipelines you're talking about, than what we see out of this administration with Keystone.
Oh, yes.
We would have to be able to get water from where we're at out west. And frankly, it's something, especially when you look at Keystone, we have to have more investment in pipeline infrastructure. It's the safest way to actually bring oil that's coming through the United States already from Canada and North Dakota and South Dakota and going to our ports, get it off the rails, get it underground where it joins thousands of other pipelines we have under this country.
We got about 3 minutes left, and I know that you have an interest in rail.
I do.
And so you're very much aware that there have been several major accidents involving rail and petroleum and other chemicals, but in petroleum that has spilled out. There was a fellow from Keystone sitting in that chair, I don't know, a year or two ago, and we had a discussion about that. They were very hopeful at that time that this whole Keystone mess was going to be fixed, but apparently not.
Well,
it's probably going to be left to the next president.
Probably, unfortunately. And the issue of rail cars carrying crude oil has gotten to the point where we only had about 9,500 cars on an annual basis that were carrying crude oil in 2008. Now we have over 500,000. So it's grown
and
that
it's
much.
Pushing out other commodities that can be moved.
That can't use the rails. And there's much more of a safe way to move that oil, and that is through the Keystone Pipeline and other pipelines that are being safely operated under our ground right now. And the saddest part is the political talking points on the Keystone Pipeline have moved away from 40,000 jobs being created to where we even have our own senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, talking about how the pipeline's only going to create 35 permanent jobs. It's a construction project. Construction projects don't create permanent jobs. That is the construction industry. When you construct a house, you don't create a permanent job, or it's never done. And when you construct highways, you don't create permanent jobs, but you actually create economic development. And that's exactly what this pipeline would do. And when you have people like Dick Durbin out there touting these false statistics and talking points for political purposes, it hurts the progress that we need to make right here in America.
Yeah. Well, how do you like being a congressman? You used to be on the other side. You were a staffer to Congressman Shimkus for a long time, and now you're on the other side of the aisle, so to speak. How do you like that?
You know, it's a privilege. I didn't know I'd have the opportunity to run. We ran some pretty costly races in a district that is a 50-50 district. I was glad last time we had a much larger margin of victory, but it's been an interesting experience. It's a privilege that the citizens of the 13th district, the 800,000 people I represent, that they give me. And I know it's a job that I take seriously every day.
Well, that's about all the time that we have left. Thank you. I know this has been a media day for you, so we're just one stop on many of your media stops, and we appreciate your actually coming here and being with us. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you, Lee.
And to my audience, I've been speaking with Congressman Rodney Davis. He represents the Illinois 13th District. We're going to be uploading this to YouTube, so if you want to show it to your friends, just go to YouTube, go to the search bar, type in Conversation with Lee Presser, Rodney Davis, and you will find us. We'll see the rest of you next time.